Amara Lewis had finally built the life she once watched from the other side of shop windows. The life of silk, champagne, and whispered envy. She was certain she had left poverty behind for good, but fate, dressed in rags, was waiting to remind her who she really was. One rainy night, she rejected a poor beggar, and days later discovered he was her billionaire father-in-law. Why do we look down on those who have nothing? How can one cruel moment rewrite an entire future? What happens when pride meets truth? Rain hammered against the glass towers of Fifth Avenue, turning the streetlights into streaks of trembling gold. Amara stepped out of the boutique clutching a designer bag that cost more than her mother's yearly income. The world smelled of wet asphalt and ambition. She tilted her chin upward as if daring the sky to mess up her perfect hair. A shape moved from the mouth of an alley. "Miss, spare some change?" The voice cracked like old wood. She turned, impatient. The man before her was soaked to the bone, beard tangled, eyes startlingly clear. He held out a trembling hand and in the other, a broken gold watch whose glass face spider-webbed with age. "I don't have," she began, but he cut through her polished tone with words that froze her. "You look like someone who remembers hunger," he said softly. The sentence stabbed through layers of perfume and pride. It wasn't pity he spoke with, it was recognition. For a heartbeat she saw herself, the little girl in hand-me-down shoes, eating crackers for dinner while her mother worked night shifts. But the memory hurt, and hurt was weakness. She straightened. "People like you shouldn't stand in the rain waiting for miracles. Or earn. Don't beg." The old man studied her, eyes calm as if she were the one being tested. "Time reveals all," he murmured, looking at the cracked watch before shuffling back into the dark. A camera shutter clicked. Across the street, Miles, a teenage photographer hiding under a diner awning, lowered his lens. He hadn't meant to intrude, but the contrast between the shining woman and the fading beggar demanded to be captured. He whispered to himself, "That's a story." Amara checked her reflection in a shop window. Her lipstick hadn't smudged, but the rain had blurred her outline, distorting the woman she thought she was. Her phone buzzed. "Daniel Brooks, dinner tomorrow. Mother says we're something that photographs well." She smiled faintly. "I always do." Behind her, the beggar opened his palm. Water pooled around the gold watch as he whispered again, "Time reveals all." His eyes followed her retreating figure not with anger, but with quiet certainty. Miles glanced at the photo glowing on his camera screen and saved it under one title: "The Girl Who Looked Away." Elaine Lewis had once believed that dignity could fill an empty stomach, but life had proven her wrong more than once. Still, she held on to it like scripture. She was the kind of woman who would rather bleed quietly than beg loudly. But that pride, the same pride she had passed down to her daughter, would one day destroy them both. Why does pride feel safer than love? How do the scars of one generation infect the next? What happens when survival turns into vanity? The morning light slid through the narrow cracks of their apartment blinds, painting the kitchen in tired gold. The smell of instant coffee filled the air, a scent that felt like both comfort and defeat. Elaine sat at the small table sewing a tear in her old uniform, the same one she'd worn when she was a maid for the Brooks family. Her hands still remembered the weight of their silk curtains, the scent of imported flowers, and the sound of Victoria Brooks's voice slicing through the halls like ice. Amara entered, wrapped in a robe that wasn't hers. She'd spent the night at Daniel's penthouse again, the kind of place that looked like success was carved into its walls. Her mother's eyes softened but then hardened. Love and worry always fought for space in her chest. "Long night?" Elaine asked without looking up. "Just work." "And dinner?" Amara replied. It was half true. She had been working to become someone the world would never call poor again. Elaine's needle paused. "You're seeing that Brooks boy a lot." Amara smiled, not with warmth but with victory. "He loves me, Mom. You'll see. I won't live like this forever." Her mother sighed. "You think money will save you?" "I used to think the same thing." Amara frowned. "You didn't think enough. You worked for people like them, remember? You scrubbed their floors while they walked over you." Elaine looked up sharply. "And yet, I walked away when I was told to crawl." "Don't mistake poverty for weakness, Amara. It's arrogance that breaks people." Her words echoed, heavy and prophetic. But Amara wasn't listening. Her eyes had landed on an old newspaper clipping tucked beside the fridge, a faded photo of Victoria Brooks from years ago, smiling at a charity gala. "That's Daniel's mother?" she murmured. Elaine froze. The needle pricked her finger, a tiny bead of blood forming. "Yes," she said quietly. "She fired me." "Why?" Elaine's gaze drifted to the window, to the gray skyline beyond. Because I refused to bow when she insulted me. That family doesn't forgive pride, not from people like us. Silence filled the room. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of rain returning outside. Amara looked at her mother, then at her own reflection in the kitchen window. She thought she saw strength, but it was only hunger wearing confidence as a mask. As she left for work, Elaine whispered to the empty room, "Just don't forget where you came from, my daughter." But Amara already had. Amara Lewis had never looked more beautiful or more hollow. Every detail of the evening was perfection. The violin music, the shimmer of champagne, the skyline framed like a promise. But perfection was only a disguise. Beneath the glittering surface of the Brooks family's empire, something ugly was waiting to surface. Why do we chase dreams that demand our souls? How can love blind us to danger? What happens when we mistake wealth for worth? The Brooks Tower ballroom shimmered with gold chandeliers and laughter that sounded too rehearsed. Amara's gown clung to her like liquid light, a gift from Victoria Brooks herself, chosen to reflect the family's standards. Daniel stood beside her, tall, elegant, the kind of man who wore charm like armor. His eyes, however, carried something else, restlessness. "Are you nervous?" Amara whispered as they stood before the crowd. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just about everything my mother planned." Victoria Brooks glided across the marble floor like a queen in exile. Her beauty was sculpted, her smile sharpened by control. When she spoke, people leaned in, not from warmth but from fear of missing something important. She raised her glass. To Daniel and Amara, a union of love, ambition, and legacy. Applause filled the room, but Amara noticed something missing. Leonard Brooks, Daniel's father. She had never met him. His name was spoken only in past tense. "Traveling," Victoria once said curtly. Others whispered he was ill, or distant. But even Daniel avoided the topic like a wound that hadn't healed. As the applause faded, Daniel took Amara's hand and lowered to one knee. Gasps swept through the crowd, the moment everyone expected, yet somehow it still felt scripted. "Amara Lewis," he said, voice trembling just enough to sound real, "you turned my world right side up. Will you marry me?" For a moment, her mind returned to her mother's words, "Don't mistake arrogance for strength." But then she looked at the diamond, and the thought vanished like fog. "Yes," she breathed. 1,000 times yes. The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Miles, now a freelance photojournalist working for a lifestyle blog, was in the corner covering the event. He lowered his camera for a split second, the same lens that had once captured her in The Beggar in the Rain. He stared at her, confused, as if the woman before him couldn't possibly be the same one he'd photographed. When he glanced at his camera's memory card, he noticed something strange. The folder labeled "The Girl Who Looked Away" was open, though he hadn't touched it. A chill ran through him. Meanwhile, Victoria leaned in close to Amara and whispered, "You'll find that in this family, appearances are everything. Remember that, dear." The orchestra began to play again, but in the background, thunder rumbled, faint yet deliberate, as if nature itself disapproved. And far from the glittering ballroom, a man in tattered clothes stood outside, watching through the rain-streaked glass. His hand rested on a broken gold watch. The seconds ticked. He smiled. Time was almost up. Amara Lewis had always imagined wealth as freedom, but inside the Brooks mansion, it felt more like captivity disguised as luxury. The chandeliers sparkled, the portraits glared, and the silence of the hallways whispered warnings she didn't yet understand. Why do riches echo louder than conscience? How can beauty hide so much rot? What happens when the walls begin to remember the truth? The Brooks estate stood on the city's edge like an empire remembering its prime. The marble staircase curved upward into shadows, lined with portraits of Brooks' ancestors, all staring down with the same icy entitlement. Amara traced her fingers along the polished banister as she followed Victoria toward the drawing room. "Daniel's father built this house," Victoria said smoothly. "Every brick is a testament to the Brooks name." Amara smiled politely. "It's beautiful." "Yes," Victoria replied. "But beauty fades if one forgets to maintain it." Her tone sharpened on the last words, turning the sentence into something closer to a threat than a statement. They entered the drawing room. Firelight flickered against oil paintings and glass cabinets full of antique watches, dozens of them. Some gleamed, others were cracked, as if time itself had been both collected and broken. Amara paused before one, a gold pocket watch with a small chip near the hinge. She felt an odd tug in her chest as if she'd seen it before, in another life, in another hand. Victoria noticed. Leonard had a fondness for timepieces, she said curtly. He used to say you can tell a person's soul by how they treat time. Where is he now? Amara asked gently. A shadow crossed Victoria's face. Abroad. He preferred distance. But something in her tone felt rehearsed. Practiced. Like a lie polished over years. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the mansion fell quiet, Amara wandered through the West Hall. She found Daniel alone in his father's old study, staring at a faded photograph. A man standing beside a car, smiling broadly, with Daniel as a boy perched on his shoulders. Was that him? She asked softly. Daniel nodded. He left when I was 15. Said he needed to find meaning. My mother says he betrayed the family. I think he just couldn't breathe here. Amara touched his arm. Maybe he'll come back someday. Daniel gave a sad laugh. If he does, I doubt Mother would open the door. Outside, rain began again, tapping against the tall windows like restless fingers. From the garden, a faint movement caught Amara's eye, a figure near the iron gate, leaning on the fence, watching the house. The flicker of lightning revealed him only for an instant, but she saw enough. A man in worn clothes, holding something that caught the light. A broken gold watch. Amara blinked. The man was gone. Her breath quickened. Daniel, did your father ever? He turned puzzled. Ever what? She hesitated. Nothing. Just thought I saw something outside. Daniel shrugged it off, pulling her close. You worry too much. But Amara couldn't shake the chill crawling up her spine. She didn't know why, but the house felt haunted. Not by ghosts. By secrets. Amara Lewis had always believed the internet was a stage for the polished and the perfect, until the world turned its spotlight on her worst moment. One image, 1 second of arrogance, was about to erase everything she had built. Why does one cruel act echo louder than 1,000 good ones? How does truth travel faster than apology? What happens when the world that praised you decides to watch you fall? It began on a quiet Wednesday morning. Amara was at the Brooks Foundation office, smiling through a photo shoot for a charity campaign titled, Hope Has a Face. She wore pearls and confidence, signing donation checks with practiced grace. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. His expression froze and he turned the screen toward her. A headline blazed across it. Viral photo exposes charity queen as heartless socialite. Beneath the headline was the image, her face, cold and pristine under the rain, staring down at a drenched beggar clutching a broken gold watch. The caption read, She looked away. Her blood turned to ice. That's not, Daniel, that was before I even met you. But he was already scrolling through the comments. Disgusting hypocrisy. This is the woman running kindness campaigns? Proof that the rich will always despise the poor. Within hours, the photo spread across every platform. Influencers reposted it. Talk shows debated it. Memes mocked it. And every repost felt like a stone hurled straight at her heart. Amara called Miles, her voice shaking. Why would you do this? He sounded shocked. Amara, I didn't. Someone hacked my drive. That shot was never supposed to. But she hung up, hearing only the roar of her own panic. Victoria Brooks appeared in the doorway of the office, calm as a viper. I told you appearances are everything, she said softly. And now you've ruined ours. Please, Victoria, this wasn't intentional. Victoria leaned closer, her perfume sharp, her words sharper. You embarrassed this family. Daniel's proposal, our reputation, you've stained it all. Fix it or you won't be part of this family at all. By nightfall, journalists were waiting outside the mansion gates. Cameras flashed as she and Daniel drove through. Reporters shouted, Amara, any comment on the viral photo? Inside the car, silence stretched like a bruise. Daniel gripped the steering wheel. You could have told me, he muttered. I didn't think it mattered. But it does. Everything matters here. Tears blurred the world outside her window, the city lights dissolving into streaks of shame. At midnight she scrolled through the storm online, reading strangers dissecting her soul. Each comment felt like a verdict. Each share, a nail in her coffin. Then a new notification appeared, @unknown tagged you in a video. Her finger hesitated before tapping. The screen lit up. It wasn't just the photo anymore, it was the full video clip. A shaky recording of her voice saying, people like you should work instead of waiting for pity. And the man's reply, calm and haunting, time reveals all. The video cut to black. But the world didn't. It had just begun to remember. Amara Lewis had survived every kind of storm, except the one that came dressed as silence. The world had already crucified her online, but the dinner table she sat at now would finish what the internet began. Why do our sins return wearing familiar faces? How can truth destroy what love built? What happens when the person you hurt is the one you were meant to honor? The Brooks dining hall shimmered under candlelight, the kind of light that made everything look more graceful than it truly was. Amara sat stiff beside Daniel, trying to steady her breath. Across the table, Victoria Brooks carved her steak with surgical precision. Every movement elegant, controlled, merciless. "I trust your PR team is handling the situation," Victoria said, eyes fixed on her plate. Amara nodded faintly. "They're working on a statement. I'll apologize publicly." "A bit late for that, don't you think?" Victoria's tone was mild, but her words landed like blades. "Our name has been dragged through the mud. Daniel's business partners are reconsidering contracts." Daniel shifted uneasily. "Mother, that's enough." But she cut him off. "No, darling. She needs to understand the weight of what she's done. In this family, reputation is everything." The sound of clinking silverware filled the tension like background applause for cruelty. Then the butler entered quietly and leaned toward Victoria. "Madam, there's a gentleman at the door. He says he's family." Victoria frowned. "Family? Who?" The butler hesitated. "He wouldn't give a name. Said you'd know him when you saw him." Before anyone could respond, the doors opened. A man stepped in, soaked from the rain, clothes worn, beard gray and unkempt. Gasps rippled through the room. Amara's fork slipped from her hand. Her throat tightened. The gold watch on his wrist glimmered faintly in the candlelight. "Leonard?" Victoria whispered, her face turning as pale as the tablecloth. He smiled faintly. "You remember me then?" Daniel stood stunned. "Dad? What are you doing here?" Leonard Brooks, the man everyone thought gone, broken or dead, looked slowly around the table. His gaze stopped on Amara. And she froze. It was him. The beggar. The man she had rejected in the rain. He stepped closer. "We've met before, haven't we, Miss Lewis?" Her voice broke. I didn't know." "But you knew enough to judge." His tone wasn't cruel, only sad. "You looked at me the way this family once looked at your mother." Victoria rose sharply. "This is outrageous. Leonard, you can't just walk in here and—" He raised his hand. "Outrageous? You mean truth? I wanted to see what kind of woman my son was marrying. So I went where masks don't work, the streets." The room went dead silent. Even the candles seemed to shrink. "I begged," Leonard said, voice quiet but cutting through every heartbeat. "Not for money, for character. And what I found," he looked at Amara, eyes full of sorrow, "was everything I once failed to stop in this house." Amara covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. Please forgive me. I didn't mean." "But you did," Leonard said softly. "That's the truth that money can't buy back." Victoria turned away, trembling with fury. Daniel stood between them, torn apart. Amara's tears fell onto the white linen, blooming like stains that would never wash away. And somewhere in the back of the room the antique clocks began to chime all at once, a sound like time laughing. Amara Lewis woke to a world that no longer pretended to love her. The morning light no longer felt like salvation, it was interrogation in gold. One dinner had destroyed everything the internet hadn't already burned. Why do we only value truth after it ruins us? How can shame travel faster than forgiveness? What happens when the empire we build from lies finally asks for payment? Her name trended again before breakfast. The dinner of deceit. Beggar or billionaire? The fiancé who failed a test. Headlines blurred together like accusations shouted by strangers. She turned on the TV. News anchors debated her moral worth while sponsors pulled out of the Brooks Foundation campaign. On social media, hashtags multiplied. Hashtag the girl who looked away, hashtag billionaire beggar, hashtag poetic justice. The same faces that had toasted her success now dissected her downfall in viral think pieces about hypocrisy and class. Daniel refused calls from investors. Victoria refused to be photographed. The Brooks estate, once a fortress of wealth, felt like a crime scene, every hallway echoing with silence and old clocks. "You've turned us into a spectacle," Victoria hissed that afternoon. She stood by the window in black silk, watching reporters gather at the gates. "This family was built on reputation. Your mistake cost us legacy." Amara's voice cracked. "It wasn't just my mistake. Leonard tested me. He deceived us all." "But he was right," Victoria shot back. "He proved what I feared. That pride repeats itself." Daniel stepped between them. "Stop. Both of you. His voice trembled, not with anger but exhaustion. Maybe we all needed to be exposed. Maybe this is what truth looks like. Victoria turned away, lips tight. Truth doesn't pay bills. That night, Daniel and Amara sat in his office surrounded by headlines printed on glossy paper. Each one was a wound in ink. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "If I could take it back." He looked at her, eyes hollow. "I don't know who I'm marrying anymore." She reached for his hand but he pulled away. "Maybe you never did," she said softly. "Maybe you fell in love with the image I created." Daniel didn't answer. He stared at the window where paparazzi lights flickered like lightning. "We can't stay here," he finally murmured. "Mother's right about one thing, this house eats people." The next morning Victoria announced through her publicist that the engagement was postponed indefinitely. Investors withdrew. The Brooks name dropped from charity boards and magazine covers. Their empire, polished for decades, cracked in a week. Amara packed her things quietly. On her dresser lay one of Leonard's watches. Left behind the night he vanished again after the dinner. The glass was still broken, the hands frozen at 12:03. She slipped it into her pocket and whispered, "Time reveals all," for the first time with humility instead of anger. But humility came too late to save what was already ruin. Amara Lewis had once measured her worth by how loudly the world applauded her, but now she was learning the power of silence, the kind that doesn't punish but purifies. Her fall from grace had emptied her bank accounts and her inbox, yet somehow she felt lighter than she ever had before. Why do we wait until we lose everything to see clearly? How does humiliation become the teacher pride could never be? What happens when silence finally speaks louder than fame? The city no longer glittered for her. She walked through its streets unnoticed, no bodyguards, no flashing cameras, no curated smiles. Just Amara, a plain coat, and the sound of rain returning like an old friend. She stopped at a small community shelter on the corner of 12th Street. A sign read, "Warm meals. Open hearts." The scent of soup and disinfectant drifted through the open door. Inside volunteers moved quietly, laughter soft, work steady. She hesitated at the entrance until an older woman with silver hair approached. "You're new here," the woman said gently. "We can always use more hands." Amara nodded. "I'm not here for attention," she whispered. The woman smiled. "Good. You're in the right place then." She began folding blankets, serving meals and scrubbing dishes. At first, the work felt foreign. Her manicured fingers ached, her back protested. But the exhaustion brought peace instead of shame. People thanked her without knowing her name. No one cared about her past. It was the first time she'd ever felt human instead of polished. One evening, as she handed a bowl of soup to a frail man in the corner, she froze. His face was different, younger, but his eyes, they carried the same sadness, the same quiet knowing as the beggar's. He looked up at her and smiled faintly. "Funny thing about people," he said. "They only remember you when they need something." She nodded slowly. "Or when they can use you." He laughed softly. "You learn fast." That night, after the shelter closed, Amara sat outside on the curb, watching the rain beat across the pavement. The streetlight glinted off the broken gold watch she still carried in her pocket, Leonard's. Its hands hadn't moved in weeks. For the first time she didn't see it as a curse but as a mirror, a reminder that time stops for everyone who refuses to grow. She thought of her mother, of Daniel, of Leonard. Each one had been right in a different way. Each had warned her that pride devours love first. The city hummed around her, indifferent and alive. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Maybe it's time to start again." In the distance, a church bell rang, 12 slow chimes that sounded like forgiveness. And as the final note faded, a hand rested gently on her shoulder. "Amara," a man's voice said. She turned, and for the first time in months she smiled through her tears. "Leonard," she breathed. But he looked older now, wearier, and his eyes carried something deeper than forgiveness. Amara Lewis had rehearsed her apology 100 times, but when she finally saw Leonard Brooks again, words felt too small for what she owed. She had once looked down on him as if he were beneath her, yet now she couldn't even meet his eyes. Why do we ask forgiveness only when it's almost too late? How can mercy heal what shame still guards? What happens when the one you hurt becomes the hand that helps you stand again? The shelter's back room smelled faintly of soap and candle wax. Rain pattered against the window like a metronome, keeping time with her heartbeat. Leonard sat on a wooden bench, his old coat folded beside him. He looked tired but not broken, just settled like a man who'd stopped running from the truth. Amara stood in the doorway clutching the broken gold watch. "I've been carrying this," she said. "It stopped the night I lost everything." He gestured for her to sit. "Maybe that was when you started finding something." She sat opposite him, her voice trembling. "You tested me. I failed. I judged you when you were the one who could have judged me." Leonard smiled faintly. "I didn't test you to break you, Amara. I wanted Daniel to see who you really were, before the world did. But the world has a cruel way of doing its own teaching." She looked down at her hands. "I thought love meant climbing out of where I came from. I didn't realize love means remembering it." He nodded. "Pride and poverty are cousins. Both can make a person desperate to prove something." They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the rain. Then Leonard reached into his pocket and pulled out another watch, identical to the broken one but whole, its face gleaming softly in the dim light. "This one belonged to my father," he said. "He used to say that a man isn't measured by the time he keeps, but by the moments he redeems." He placed it in her palm. "You can't undo what's done, Amara. But you can keep better time now." Tears blurred her vision. "Does Daniel know you're here?" Leonard shook his head. "He will. But first you needed to." She reached for his hand. "Thank you, for not turning your back on me." He chuckled softly. "You already did that once for both of us." They both laughed, quietly, almost freely. Outside, the rain began to ease, and a faint stripe of sunlight pushed through the clouds. Amara fastened the unbroken watch on her wrist. Its ticking sounded like a heartbeat returning. "It's moving," she whispered. Leonard stood, placing the old cracked watch on the windowsill. "Then so are you." As he turned to leave, she called after him, "Leonard, will I ever make it right?" He paused at the door. "You already have, if you mean it." The door closed softly behind him. Amara stared at the two watches, the broken past and the ticking present, and understood that redemption was never instant. It was earned second by second. Amara Lewis had begun again, quietly, honestly. Weeks passed since her meeting with Leonard. She worked at the shelter every day not for redemption, but because the work itself made sense of her pain. The noise of her past had finally faded. Yet something inside her whispered that the story wasn't over. Why do some tests never end? How can love hide behind deception? What happens when the truth arrives dressed as mercy, but feels like betrayal? One evening she returned to her small rented apartment. On her doorstep lay an envelope sealed in black wax, marked with the Brooks family crest. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Come to the Brooks estate. Midnight. D." Her pulse quickened. Daniel. She hadn't seen him since the day everything fell apart. Was this closure, or another reckoning? At midnight she walked up the long drive. The mansion loomed against the moonlight like a memory refusing to die. The doors opened before she could knock. Inside, the chandeliers burned low. Only 3 people waited in the dining hall: Daniel, Victoria, and Leonard. No cameras. No reporters. Just the truth waiting. Daniel spoke first. His voice was soft, careful. "Amara, there's something you need to know. The night you met my father as the beggar, it wasn't just his idea." Amara's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Leonard stepped forward, eyes solemn. "It was my son's idea first." The room fell silent. Amara looked between them, disbelief spreading like fire. "You, what?" Daniel met her gaze. "I wanted to know if the woman I loved would love me if I lost everything. I told my father. He turned it into something bigger, a test for both of us." Her voice trembled. "So all of this, my humiliation, the exposure, the dinner?" Leonard sighed. "The dinner wasn't supposed to happen like that. But truth has its own schedule." Victoria's cold composure cracked for the first time. "They played God, Amara. And we all paid for it." Amara felt the room tilt. "You both tested me? My entire life fell apart because of an experiment." Daniel took a step closer. "I didn't mean to hurt you. But I needed to see who you were without the cameras, without the fame." She cut him off. "You could have asked me. You could have trusted me." The words echoed through the hall like thunder. Leonard lowered his head. "He trusted me instead, and I turned it into a lesson none of us will forget." Amara's eyes filled with tears. "So all this time, the real lie wasn't mine." Daniel reached out, voice breaking. "Amara, please. I still love you." She stepped back. "Then let me go before you ruin that too." A long silence stretched. Then Leonard spoke quietly. "Maybe that's the last lesson. Love without control." She turned to leave but paused by the door. "You both taught me something," she said. "The difference between testing someone's worth and giving them a chance to show it." Then she walked into the dawn, the ticking of the watch on her wrist fading into the distance. Behind her, Leonard whispered to Daniel, "The experiment is over." Daniel's voice cracked. "No, father. It's just begun, for all of us." Outside, the sun rose over the Brooks estate, soft, merciless and new.